My name is Vryle Doss, and I teach interspecies combat theory at the Galactic Union Academy on Station Gorvan 9. I have been doing this for 14 years. 14 years of watching students from 47 different species walk through my classroom door, puff out their chests, and immediately begin sizing each other up like predators circling a single piece of meat. I have seen Borrathi warriors crack the floor tiles just by stomping their feet too hard. I have seen a Quelun diplomat's son cry because a Thraxian cadet looked at him sideways. I have seen things that would make a seasoned war admiral put in for early retirement, but I had never, not once, in 14 years of doing this job, seen anything quite like what happened on the third week of the new semester. And the worst part? I almost did not notice it coming. Let me back up. The semester had started the way all semesters start. Loud, crowded, absolutely insufferable. 42 new cadets had filed into my classroom on the first morning, dragging their equipment bags and their cultural baggage and their enormous fragile egos through the door in roughly equal measure. I stood at the front of the room and watched them with the dead-eyed patience of a creature that has long since made peace with its own suffering. The seating arrangement was the usual disaster. Borrathi cadets immediately claimed the back rows, because Borrathi are large and territorial and they treat classroom seating like a military occupation. The Quelun students huddled in the middle rows, which is where Quelun students always sit, because the Quelun believe that the middle of any space is the safest position, a cultural habit that their species developed over 6,000 years of being everyone else's lunch. The Thraxians, all four of them, spread themselves across the left side of the room with the casual arrogance of beings who have never once considered the possibility that they might not be the most important creatures in any given space. And then there were the others, the scattered cadets. The ones who did not fit neatly into any tribal cluster. A Finhari exchange student named Brix who had the unfortunate habit of clicking his secondary mandibles when he was nervous, which meant he had been clicking them more or less constantly since he arrived. A Melvosi cadet named Offa who was so covered in natural bioluminescent patches that she basically functioned as her own emergency lighting. A pair of Solkari twins, Deno and Fess, who communicated with each other in a private frequency that no other species could hear, which made everyone around them deeply uncomfortable for reasons they could never quite explain. And in the third row, second seat from the left, there was the human. Her name was Petra Voss. Now I want to be very clear about something. I had taught human cadets before. 3 of them, over the years. All 3 had been quiet, competent, slightly unsettling in ways I could not articulate, and had graduated without major incident. Humans, as a species, were relatively new to the Galactic Union. They had been full members for only 22 years, which, in galactic terms, made them approximately the equivalent of a toddler who has just learned to walk and is now standing in the middle of a room full of expensive furniture with a look of cheerful curiosity on their face. The general consensus among older Union species was that humans were fine, harmless, a little odd, weirdly emotional, prone to making friends with things that should not, by any reasonable biological assessment, want to be their friends. The kind of species that would look at a supernova and say beautiful, instead of run. Petra Voss looked, at first glance, like a perfectly standard human. She was not particularly tall by human standards. She had short dark hair, brown skin, and the kind of expression that suggested she was always thinking about something slightly more interesting than whatever was directly in front of her. She wore her academy uniform with exactly the right amount of casualness, which is to say it was neat but not aggressively neat. The kind of neat that says I put in the minimum necessary effort, and I am comfortable with that. She sat down, pulled out her data tablet, and looked around the room with calm, unhurried interest. Nobody paid much attention to her. This, as it turned out, was a mistake. The mistake was understandable, though, because the person everyone was paying attention to was Gorvan Olteth. Gorvan was a Borrathi cadet. He was 19 years old in Borrathi years, which translated to approximately 23 in standard galactic years. And he was, without any meaningful competition, the largest student currently enrolled at Gorvan 9 Academy. He stood 2.5 meters tall. His hide was the deep gray-green of old volcanic rock, textured with the ridge patterns that indicated high-caste military lineage. His hands were the size of my torso. He moved through the world the way very large, very confident things move, which is to say, slowly, deliberately, and with the complete assumption that everything in his path would get out of the way before he reached it. The thing about Gorvan was that he was not, technically speaking, doing anything wrong. Not at first. He was just being Borrathi. Borrathi culture has a very specific social hierarchy, and within that hierarchy, physical dominance is not just respected, it is expected. A Borrathi who does not establish dominance in a new social environment is considered weak, possibly sick, maybe spiritually compromised. So what Gorvan was doing from a purely cultural standpoint was completely normal. What he was doing from the standpoint of everyone else in the room was making the first 3 weeks of the semester absolutely miserable. It started small. He would arrive at class before anyone else and rearrange the seating to give himself more room, which displaced the students around him whether they liked it or not. He would speak over other cadets during discussions, not rudely, exactly, but with the steady, implacable confidence of someone who has never once considered that another perspective might be worth finishing. He would stand too close to smaller students when they were working, not touching them, just hovering, like a weather system that had developed opinions. The Quellan students started taking the long route around the back of the building to avoid passing him in the corridor. Brix the Fenhari clicked his mandibles so much that I genuinely worried he would wear them down. Ofa the Melvosi had started sitting with her bioluminescent patches deliberately dimmed, which is the Melvosi equivalent of trying to be invisible. The Solkari twins communicated at their private frequency almost constantly now, which I suspect meant they were discussing exit strategies. I was watching all of this. I want to be absolutely clear that I was watching it. I had a plan. The plan involved waiting until Gorvan did something that crossed from cultural expression into genuine violation of Academy policy, and then addressing it through proper channels, which is the correct and professional approach to this kind of situation. The plan did not survive contact with the 4th Tuesday of the semester. It was the 4th Tuesday, 3rd period, practical threat assessment. This is the class where cadets learn to evaluate a situation and determine the appropriate level of response. It is in retrospect a deeply ironic class in which to have this particular incident occur. I had assigned group work. The cadets were supposed to be analyzing a scenario involving a multi-species border dispute and recommending a response protocol. I had grouped them deliberately to mix species, because interspecies cooperation is a core Academy value, and also because watching cadets from incompatible cultures try to work together gives me useful data about where the friction points are. Gorvan had been placed in a group with Petra, Brix, and a Thraxian cadet named Sultan Ovas, who was not particularly large but had the kind of sharp, flat personality that made him difficult to ignore. I was moving around the room checking in on groups, and I had just finished a very productive conversation with the Solkari twins about their scenario analysis, when I heard Gorvan's voice rise above the general classroom noise. "This strategy," he said, and the way he said it had a specific quality to it. The tone of someone dismissing something not because they have thought about it carefully but because dismissing things is how they communicate power, is the suggestion of something small. I turned around. Gorvan was looking at Petra. Petra had apparently just finished explaining her recommended response protocol. She was looking up at him with that same calm, slightly distracted expression she always wore, her data tablet resting in her hands. "Small things," Gorvan continued, "should not make strategic recommendations. Small things should listen, and learn, and then listen more." The room had gone quiet. Not suddenly, but in that gradual pulling way that rooms go quiet when everyone realizes something is happening that they should pay attention to. Brix had stopped clicking. "That should have told me something right there." "I think the strategy is sound," Petra said. Her voice was perfectly level. "The multi-layered approach reduces casualty projections by 31% while achieving the same territorial outcome." I ran the numbers twice. "Numbers," Gorvan said, and he leaned forward slightly, just enough to use his size as punctuation, "are not wisdom. Numbers are what small things use because they cannot rely on strength." Sultan Ovas, the Thraxian, had leaned back in his chair and was watching with the expression of someone who has purchased tickets to a show and is now evaluating whether the performance is worth the price. "Gorvan," I said his name from across the room, using the specific volume and cadence that 14 years of teaching had taught me was most effective for interrupting escalating situations without triggering defensive responses. He looked at me. His expression said that he was aware I had spoken, and was deciding how much weight to give it. "The purpose of this exercise," I said, moving toward the group now, "is collaborative analysis. All perspectives contribute to the final recommendation." "Some perspectives," Gorvan said, still looking at me, but making it absolutely clear through posture and tone that the statement was directed at Petra, "contribute less than others. This is biological reality. The Academy cannot change what nature has decided." I was about 4 meters away. I had my professional intervention fully loaded and ready. I did not get to use it, because Petra Voss stood up. She did not stand up in the way that small beings usually stand up when they are about to be deferential or apologetic or carefully diplomatic. She stood up in the specific way that I would later learn. Humans stand up when they have made a decision and the decision is final. She pushed her chair back. She straightened to her full height, which was, to be absolutely precise about it, approximately 1 meter and 68 centimeters, which meant that she was standing directly in front of a being who was nearly a full meter taller than her. She looked at Gorvan. Gorvan looked back at her. The room was so quiet that I could hear the environmental recyclers in the ceiling. "Say that again," Petra said, quietly, completely quietly. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of volume but the presence of something much more focused. Gorvan smiled. I had not seen him smile before. It was the kind of smile that among Borrathi indicates the highest level of social confidence. It means I have assessed this situation and I have no concerns whatsoever. "Small things," he said, and he leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer to hers, which among Borrathi is a dominance display so clear it barely needs translation. Should know their place in the order of things. It is not unkind to say so. It is simply true. What happened next took approximately 1.5 seconds. I have reviewed it in my memory many times since. Petra Voss reached up with no warning, no wind-up and no apparent hesitation and slapped Gorvan Olteth across the face. Not a tap, not a symbolic gesture, an actual full-contact open palm strike to the left side of his face, delivered with the kind of clean mechanical efficiency that suggested it was not the first time she had done something like this, and she had given the mechanics of it some thought. The sound it made was extraordinary. Gorvan's head moved. Not a lot, because Gorvan's head was approximately the size of a large storage crate and was anchored to a neck like a structural support column, but it moved, enough to be visible, enough to be undeniable. The room did not just go quiet. The room became a vacuum. I am fairly sure several cadets stopped breathing. Gorvan straightened up very slowly. His expression had gone through approximately 4 distinct phases in about 1 second. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been recalibration, and then a kind of stillness that I had not seen on his face before and could not immediately interpret. Petra lowered her hand. She was still looking at him. Her expression had not changed at all. "I heard you the first time," she said. "I just wanted to make sure you heard me. I want to tell you that I handled what happened next with grace and authority. I want to tell you that. What actually happened was that I stood in the middle of my classroom, 4 meters from a human cadet and a Borrathi warrior who were locked in the most loaded staring contest I had ever witnessed in 14 years of professional education, and I did absolutely nothing for what I can only estimate was 5 full seconds. 5 seconds is not a long time in most contexts. In this context it was geological. The entire class was still frozen. Brix had his secondary mandibles pressed completely flat against his jaw, which is the Fenhari equivalent of holding your breath. Uffa's bioluminescent patches had flickered on at full intensity the moment the slap landed and had not dimmed since, which meant she was currently functioning as a small emergency beacon in the middle of the 3rd row. Sultan of As, the Thraxian, had leaned so far forward in his chair that he was in genuine danger of falling off it. The Solkari twins were completely motionless in a way that suggested they were transmitting at their private frequency at approximately 10 times their normal rate, and Gorvan Olteth was still standing there, still looking at Petra, still doing that stillness I could not interpret. His left cheek had a faint mark on it. Human hands are soft compared to Borrathi hide. The mark was not damage. It was more like a statement that had been pressed directly into the surface of his face, and was taking a moment to be absorbed. I finally moved. "Cadet Voss," I said, and I am professionally proud of the fact that my voice came out at the correct volume and did not reflect any of what was happening inside my head, which was essentially every alarm I possessed going off simultaneously. "Step back, please." Petra stepped back. 1 step. She did not look away from Gorvan. "Cadet Olteth," I said. "Sit down." Gorvan did not sit down. This was the part where I genuinely did not know what was going to happen. Because I had seen Borrathi cadets respond to physical contact before. I had seen what happened when someone bumped into a Borrathi in the corridor without apologizing fast enough. I had read the incident reports. I knew what Borrathi military culture said about being struck. I knew what Gorvan, by every metric available to me, should have been doing right now. He should have been furious. He was not furious. He was something else entirely, and it took me another 3 seconds to identify it because I had never seen it on a Borrathi face before. He was thinking. Not the calculating, tactical kind of thinking that Borrathi do before a physical response. Not the social arithmetic kind of thinking they do when they are deciding how hard to push back. This was different. This was the kind of thinking that happens when something occurs that does not fit into any existing category and the brain needs to build a new one from scratch. Gorvan Olteth was genuinely, deeply processing what had just happened to him. I used the pause. "Everyone," I said, loud enough to reach all 42 cadets, "take a 5-minute recess, outside the classroom, now." Nobody argued. Nobody even hesitated. 40 cadets moved toward the door with the unified motivation of beings who have just been given a socially acceptable reason to escape an extremely tense situation, and they took it. Even Sultan Ovis went, though he went slowly and kept looking back over his shoulder with an expression that said he was furious about missing whatever came next. The door closed. I looked at the 2 cadets remaining in the room. Petra was standing with her arms loosely at her sides, her data tablet still in one hand. She looked like someone who had completed a task and was waiting for the next one. Gorvan was still standing, still processing. "Sit down," I said again to both of them this time, and I pulled a chair around so that I was positioned between them, not as a barrier exactly, but as a clear statement of intent. Petra sat immediately. Gorvan sat a moment later. He moved carefully, deliberately, the way very large things move when they are being precise about their actions. When he was seated, he looked at me, and then he looked at Petra, and then he looked at his own hands for a moment, which I found extremely interesting. "Cadet Voss," I said, "you struck a fellow student." "Yes," Petra said. "That is a violation of Academy policy." "Yes," Petra said again, same tone. No apology in it, but no aggression either, just acknowledgement. "Cadet Ul-Teth had not touched you." "No," Petra said, "he had not." "Then I need you to help me understand what just happened." Petra looked at me with that expression, the one that suggested she was always thinking about something more interesting than whatever was in front of her, except that right now whatever was in front of her had apparently become the more interesting thing. "He spent 3 weeks, she said, making every person in this room smaller. Not just me, everyone." Brix stops clicking when Gorvan looks at him, which means Brix is suppressing a nervous response because he is afraid to show it. Ofa sits with her lights off because she does not want to be noticed. The Solkari twins stopped contributing to group discussions in week 2. Sultan Ofus has been performing confidence he does not actually have because he thinks it is the only thing that will protect him. She paused. Gorvan was not going to stop because someone asked him to stop. He was going to stop when the math changed, when the situation cost him something. So I changed the math. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at Gorvan. "Cadet Ul-Teth," I said, "do you want to respond to that?" Gorvan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was noticeably different from his usual classroom voice, lower, more considered. "In Borrathi culture, a physical response to a challenge establishes the hierarchy. The one who responds harder wins the position. The one who does not respond accepts the lower position." "Yes," I said. "She struck me," Gorvan said. "She struck me and she did not run. She did not apologize. She stood and she looked at me." He paused. "In Borrathi terms, that is not aggression. That is a dominance declaration. That is the behavior of someone who has already decided they have won, and is waiting for the other party to agree." I said nothing. I was letting him arrive at wherever he was going. "She is 1.68 meters tall," Gorvan said. "She struck a Borrathi warrior and stood her ground." He looked at Petra directly now, and his expression had changed in a way I found difficult to name but impossible to miss. In Borrathi terms, that is either the greatest display of courage I have seen in a peer, or she is suffering from some kind of neurological condition that prevents accurate threat assessment. Petra tilted her head slightly. "I can confirm it is not the second one." Something happened on Gorvan's face then. It took me a moment to identify it because I had never seen it there before. He was trying not to smile. He was actually genuinely trying not to smile and not entirely succeeding. I sat back in my chair and thought about my career choices. I still had to write the incident report. I still had to send both cadets to the disciplinary coordinator. Academy policy is academy policy, and I do not get to simply decide that a situation was complicated, and therefore the rules do not apply. I wrote Petra up for physical contact violation, and Gorvan up for sustained intimidatory behavior over a 3-week period, which I probably should have written up sooner, and I handed both reports in before the end of the day. What I did not expect was what happened after. The disciplinary coordinator, a Melvosi senior officer named Was Terran, who had been running that office for longer than I had been teaching and who had the patience of someone who has personally witnessed every possible variety of cadet catastrophe, reviewed both reports and then called me in for a conversation. "The human struck first," Was Terran said. "Yes," I said. "The Borrathi had 3 weeks of documented intimidatory behavior preceding the incident." "Yes," I said. "The human's stated reasoning was that conventional de-escalation approaches were insufficient given the established pattern of behavior." "That is an accurate summary." Was Terran looked at me over the datapad. "Your professional assessment?" I thought about it. She was not wrong about the pattern. She was wrong about the method. Those are two different problems. Agreed, Terran said. Both cadets will receive formal counseling. The human will receive a conduct notation that will remain on her file unless she completes the full mediation course. The Borrathi will receive a formal warning and mandatory cultural integration sessions. She paused. Neither will be expelled. I assumed as much. Your assumption was correct. Terran set down the data pad. Do you know what the Borrathi cadet said when I asked him to describe the incident? No, I said. He said, and I am reading from the transcript here. The human cadet demonstrated greater understanding of Borrathi dominance dynamics in 1.5 seconds than the entire academy orientation program conveyed in 3 weeks. She should be commended for cultural competency. Terran looked up. Then he asked if the academy had a formal procedure for acknowledging a peer as a dominant social equal because he wished to invoke it. I stared at her. He also asked. Terran continued, with the expression of someone who has genuinely stopped being surprised by anything, whether the human cadet would be willing to be his study partner for the remainder of the semester. I walked back to my classroom and sat down at my desk and looked at the wall for a while. The next morning I watched the cadets file in for first period. Bricks came in first, which was unusual because Bricks always arrived last to avoid the crowded doorway. He walked in, took his seat, and did not click his mandibles once. Ofa came in shortly after, and her bioluminescent patches were fully lit. Not frantic, not anxious, just present, like she had made a decision about visibility, and the decision was yes. The Sulkari twins walked in together and immediately started talking, audibly to the Fenhari cadet sitting next to them, which they had never done before. Sultan Ovas came in and actually nodded to 2 other cadets when he sat down. Not the performance confidence nod he had been doing for 3 weeks. An actual nod. The kind that acknowledges another person without calculating what the acknowledgement costs. Gorvan came in and took his usual seat at the back. He put his equipment bag down, arranged his data tablet, and then looked around the room with an expression that was quieter than any expression I had seen on him before. Petra came in last, slightly late, slightly out of breath, with a coffee substitute in one hand and her data tablet tucked under her arm. She dropped into her seat, pulled up the morning material, and looked up to find Gorvan looking at her from the back row. There was a moment between them, not a long one, maybe 2 seconds. Gorvan nodded. Petra nodded back. That was all. I turned to the front of the room and pulled up the lesson material. Right, I said. Practical threat assessment continued. Today we are discussing proportional response and the distinction between deterrence and escalation. I trust everyone has done the reading. Nobody had done the reading. This is a universal constant that transcends species and culture, but they were all there, all 42 of them, sitting in the same room, breathing the same recycled air, paying something approximating attention. Bricks without his clicking, Opa with her lights on, Gorvan without his shadow hanging over the room like a planet about to fall on something, and Petra Voss in the 3rd row, 2nd seat from the left, with her expression of mild, constant interest, turning to the first page of a chapter on proportional response like she had not 4 days ago personally demonstrated a masterclass in the subject. I have been teaching at Orvan 9 for 14 years. I have a file on my desk that contains the most memorable incidents from each semester. Most of them are disasters. A few are merely very expensive. One involves a Thraxian cadet and a malfunctioning gravity calibrator that I am not legally permitted to discuss in detail. At the end of that semester, I added a new entry to the file. It is not the longest entry, it is actually quite short, but I have read it more times than I have read most of the others, and I suspect I will keep reading it for a while yet. It says, a human cadet, 1.68 m, no combat enhancements, no augmentation, no backup, stood in front of a Borrathi warrior twice her height, in front of 42 witnesses, and made a decision in 1.5 seconds that changed the social architecture of an entire classroom for the rest of the semester. And then, because I am a professional and I believe in accurate documentation, I added, I have been teaching interspecies combat theory for 14 years. I have never given a student a conduct notation and a commendation in the same week. There is a first time for everything, apparently. Below that, in smaller text, because I could not help myself. She was not wrong. I closed the file, pushed it to the back of my desk, and started preparing for next semester. 43 new cadets. I have already checked the enrollment list. One of them is human. I find, somewhat to my own surprise, that I am looking forward to it.
Would you have done what Petra did? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more. See you in the next one.